Fashion loves innovation, but they just love it as symbolism. And they hate innovation dependency. So it's like you borrow the aura without inheriting the constraints. So your material is adopted into a capsule collection. It's discarded. This is a visibility without integration. I would say it's theater without transformation. The problem is that luxury is not a platform. So they gatekeeping this monopolistic layer, right? In biopharm, they do this very often. You externalize the risk, but you internalize the narrative. They want innovation only as long as they remain sovereign over it.
Welcome to HeroInside the Ingredient Branding Podcast with Tomas Vucurevic. In each episode, Tomas will draw from his vast experience as the go-to global ingredient branding expert, and will discuss this subject with visionaries and pioneers in the field. How do you go from the zero position as a supplier of a new ingredient to the hero position in demand around the world? Let's find out.
Welcome back to the HeroInside podcast. My name is Tomas Vucurevic, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our 15th episode. My guest today is Henri Kunz, founder of Geneus, a company working at the intersection of synthetic biology, biomaterials, advanced textiles, bioprocessing, and robotics. Geneus is known for material technologies like Furoid, a lab-grown fur, and their LiquidSeries for wool and cashmere. But as you'll hear today, these innovations are not driven by fashion narratives. Henri doesn't focus on aesthetics or sustainability claims. He starts with systems, performance limits, and what a material is actually supposed to do. As you'll hear today, this question opens up a much deeper conversation. The anthropological roots of fashion and why the future of textiles may look nothing like the systems we know today. So let's dive in. Henri, welcome to my podcast. I'm really curious how our conversation will develop today. You're also German like me, but you live and work in Paris at the moment. So maybe you could just introduce yourself briefly to the audience.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. So my name is Henri Kunz. I'm the founder of Geneus. Started looking into biotech already in 2016. Before I had another company. I sold it. Yeah, so relatively short after starting in biotech, we landed in materials. So it's not really much to tell. And then the journey as itself, I'm happy to discuss it here with you.
And how did you get into that business with Geneus venture? Are you a scientist, so more of a scientist or more of a businessman? And where does your passion for materials come from?
I was before, you would say, like kind of an engineer, but I studied logistics and law, something completely atypical for you might think entering biotech. And then in 2016, I thought it may be a good time to do something completely out of my comfort zone. And I invested in a biotech startup. They worked in Parkinson research, and they did tissue engineering. So what you do is you take some human tissues in this specific case, and then you proliferate it through certain technologies and certain techniques, especially like induced pluripotent stem cell technologies into I would say real life simulating tissues for whatever indication you want to use it. So it was quite abstract at the beginning, but I was always fascinated from deep tech. I did not plan it from the beginning to do something with biotech. So this is how I landed there. The story is much more intricate, as you can imagine. This is probably would last for probably 4 podcast hours and not 40 minutes. Yeah. So long story short, I invested in a company, biomedical company working on Parkinson. And this is how it started.
Now you do many exciting things and many people can't even get their heads around what you are doing. What would you say are the 3 hottest topics within your company that you are currently working on?
Yeah. So it's easy. If you break it down to a very short answer. So the first would be what I call LiquidSeries, which is more or less a set of protein architecture. It's liquid wool, which is would say, reconstructed cashmere fiber engineered from keratinous waste streams. Probably this is the best explanation for it. This goes on the baseline assumption that biological randomness is not luxury. It is, at least this is my opinion. But reproducibility is what I would say a category in luxury. And then the second is where I'm very, very passionate. I mean, this is what I studied. I studied logistics. So it was very, very clear for me from the beginning that the vertical integration, respectively the end-to-end engineering must be, if you look now solely on a textile perspective, must be one of the main objectives, like feedstock control, process control. Process control can be very intricate, depends on what adaptive extraction technology you use, recovery technology for keratin. We use ionic liquids. I mean, normally, if you do wet spinning, somehow ionic liquids are involved. And then fabric formation, which is also a part of vertical integration, and the application mapping, which is probably maybe one of the most intricate things. Not because of I'm in love with factories, but how to say this, like cost opacity. So it's not very clear what is attributed to what, how the margin is generated, and so on and so forth. And then the fragility in the supply chain, which is at the end of the day the innovation killer. And then, I mean, the third topic, which is based a bit on the first both hot topics, it can be in parts very philosophical because it also steps into the thesis of AI, what it does, how disruptive it is, and how much humans are replaceable or not. This is like the textile for the robots, respectively for the autonomous systems. I mean, robots are not prone to a story or a narrative. It goes just simply on performance. This is what we learned and trained for a very long time in medical applications. By the way, the first real attributable medical application, which closes a bit the gap to all of this complete setup of things I'm doing, is I invented a human hair follicle in the Petri dish. This is when it started in 2017. Going back to robots, in my opinion, it is probably the most substantial diversion from a classical textile fabric fashion strategy, because it has a really, really huge relevance. I can come later to this. But I think this may be the answer to these questions.
Okay, so LiquidSeries, vertical integration, and textile for robots. I think we will come back to those topics later. As you just said, you started with biomedical applications. And what was that key learning or takeaway from that time compared to now working for luxury or fashion or consumer products? What is really different with medical applications?
I mean, the most, I would say, the steepest difference, the real differentiator is that biomedical application, I would say, teaches you discipline. You have to measure reality in terms of cell status, cell fate, with all kind of technologies. You don't measure sentiments like in textile, most associated to semantics. So you learn how to say this, that failure modes like fatigue, degradation, contamination, super important in stem cell biology, compatibility. If you transfer something to a human, how it metabolizes, and so on and so forth. And these are the main factors before you get like seduced by aesthetics, right? So in fashion, you can ship a product, you call it innovation, and the consequence is delayed. You understand? So you don't understand crack propagation so again, I have no problem with, I like all the innovators there with plant-based leather. But at the end of the day, it's physics and chemistry. And there is some time when you see these consequences, even they are delayed. And going back to the original question, the point is that this early rigor in biomedical applications, this becomes like a transfer leverage. And if you can build a material or a therapy that survive these biomedical constraints, in theory, you could build the material that survives most of the industrial constraints. Also, a bit of a problem is, this was maybe our advantage that we did not start in fashion, because if you start in fashion, the first thing you get taught is you learn storytelling, but not necessarily the truth. This is a bit the reason why the biomedical application was important, and the learnings from it was important to apply to whatever the final business will be here.
Let's shift a little bit to that state of fashion. I think we both commented and agree that the political and economical shifts of the last 2-3 years is leading into debates that have headlines like sustainability is dead, or how can we survive the valley of death, because a lot of material seems to be too expensive. They don't run on existing machinery, and have problems to make this leap from lab testing prototypes towards mass commercialization. From your perspective, what do you see actually as the biggest hurdle for new bio-based materials to really enter the market and to start replacing fossil fuel-based or other harmful materials on a larger scale?
Well, I would say the question is actually not so easy to answer. In my opinion, and based on my learning curve, if I compare it with medical tissue engineering, the hurdle in medical tissue engineering is pre-clinic, bring it to the clinic, and then let's hope that patients survive the clinical stages, that you can build up a medical facility or a therapy. And this is a bit the same in fashion. I would say in fashion, the biggest hurdle is, I would say, systemic inertia, if you understand what I mean with this. Sustainability being dead, exclamation mark, is just I would say, a symptom of the real disease. Because at the end of the day, what you see is that fashion is like this distributed supply chain organism. They are optimized since centuries for predictability, margin extractions. I think this is also a huge problem. And this is also a thing what a lot of novel materials startup CEOs and founders do not understand. It's not only for margin extraction, it's optimized for, I would say, supplier replaceability. Because new materials introduce a huge level of, I would say, uncertainty, they punish the uncertainty. So they do not, either they push you down the vertical, if you're lucky, or they only let you engineer the sequence which they think it's to be engineered. And then it falls back on all of these familiar patterns. Investors, they demand scale, brands demand consistency. And now this is also a problem that suppliers demand risk premiums, right? And old production lines, for hundreds of years, we know how to convert a fiber into a yarn. But this demands compatibility with the old production system, right? So, and then what consumers want? A good price. At least at the end of the day, they do not want to pay completely outrageous prices. And this goes also back from upstream to downstream and vice versa. So it's really ping pong. They play price ping pong. And then if a complete new material steps into this industrial machine, it just gets shredded. People say materials are too expensive. What they mean is we are trying to route these new materials through our legacy system designed for, let's stay with fibers, because with fibers, a big deal, for commodity fibers. And this is not even a cost constraint. This is a structural mismatch. And then you go to the valley of death, which is a very, very clear pattern, especially obviously in biomedical, but also in novel fibers. It's not a lack of innovation. It's the lack that the system does not give you permission.
And here, I think the ingredient branding also can play an important part. If you are able to generate a pull effect for your new material, for your ingredient, from the brands or ideally from the consumers, then this system inertia is also kind of jeopardized or is getting shaken, because they feel the pressure to maybe integrate a new material. And also, obviously, if you have a branded component, that reduces your risk of replaceability significantly, because then you're not a fiber, but you're a specific brand. But talking about this price point, then a lot of biomaterial startups thought, okay, if I can make my first lines of production only for a relatively high price, then let's enter the high fashion or the luxury market, because there the prices are much higher and they are much more willing to pay a price premium. But in our pre-discussion of the recording, you expressed also that you're a bit skeptical about that path, that the solution lies within the luxury industry.
These both questions, they are really intricately intertwined, right? So if you want to push a new material, the fashion industry, let's not name names, right? They ask you to do the impossible. They want you to behave like a commodity, because then you fit in their old production systems, because they have the scale, the infrastructure for a commodity, right? But this is like, I don't know, you ask anyone to run a marathon. So it doesn't work. Nevertheless, funny thing, but it goes back that there's this darker truth. Fashion loves innovation, but they just love it as symbolism. And they hate innovation dependency. So it's like you, I don't know, you borrow the aura without inheriting the constraints. So this is the thing. Then this goes now further to the question. So your material is adopted into a capsule collection. It's discarded. This is a visibility without degradation. Yeah? So this is, if I would be mean, I would say it's theater without transformation. The problem is that luxury is not a platform. So they gatekeeping this monopolistic layer, right? And they how to say this? In biopharma, they do this very often. You externalize the risk, but you internalize the narrative. You understand? So the risk development for us, it's, this material is not nice. So, and it's discarded. But the narrative, the internalization of the narrative is, we work on hyper innovative fibers and we are sustainable and X. So this is a real problem. And then they want innovation only as long as they remain sovereign over it.
Sure. I mean, that's why all of those houses usually demand exclusivity over that technology, and which is controversial to ingredient branding and also to consumer change, because if you want consumers to change their behavior also to new materials and adopt new materials, they must be able to experience it in many different product applications, in many different forms, in very different price points. And very seldomly a new material has been successfully implemented into the industry if it was offered only by one single supplier. And so they are here cutting themselves a little bit, because it remains then only a narrative story, but it's not becoming a commercial success. You also mentioned their overwhelmingly controlling nature and dominance. I mean, we know it from Hermes about their leather. I mean, they own the whole supply chain all the way to the farms and the cows and the feeding of them. How is it for the biomaterials? Is it the same?
Yeah.
That they want to control the supply chain?
Yeah. So this is a very distinctive. This is, by the way, a good question. The main problem, what we learned in this now about 9 years working with them, and we worked from the beginning with the very high luxury fashion houses, and these luxury brands, they want innovation only as long as they remain like sovereign over it. They want suppliers replaceable. They do this game since ever. They control the timeline to like excess where you cannot control in material innovation. You cannot control the timeline to the last hour. And to me, it strikes more that they want the story, but not the system. So when a biomaterial startup believes luxury will save them, right? They walk into I like system dynamics. It's like a control loop, right? So you get a collaboration, you get a runway moment, super, a headline, and then the brand moves on and the startup is left with the unit economics crashes completely if the brand disappear. I mean, one bag of, I just say something, plant-based fur on a shelf does nothing to you, right? So the dominance of luxury, it's really, I would say, structural, like an asymmetry of power, because the brands, they own the distribution, they have the attention, and on the supplier, the risk are pushed down. So if you do not own the system, you'll be just consumed.
So if high fashion isn't the savior for many founders, where should material innovators look instead? Is it contractual business? Is it like in the old days, the military, workwear, institutional partners, or in other categories or industries? Where to go if you have a good biomaterial?
This is also a multifaceted question, which goes also into this luxury dominance. And then it runs cascading into other sort streams. So if you refuse dependency, this is maybe a good way of doing it. So if your survival requires a validation by a luxury house, then you're not building a technology company. You're building a supplier fantasy. And as I said before, suppliers are designed to be replaced. So you root around the gate. You build a system where the material is non-optional. And this is maybe giving a very, very deep answer, but this is probably the best answer to this question, that you create an adoption of your technologies where the performance is driving the selection, not the narrative. And then it goes again back to vertical integration as much as possible. This is not a romantic, preference of mine. This is just a mathematical necessity. So if the system that evaluates you is hostile, you must build your own evaluation system. And then it goes then very easy to like intended use domains like robotics, industrial systems, protective applications, infrastructure. Everything was medical dependent, right? So materials for, let's say, sutures or medical surgeries, or a simpler place where your material, the value is measured by failure cost and not by a resonance to a story. This I would say. And then all of these domains, these new domains where you don't have more or less competitors, they don't have a qualification cycle. I mean, this is the point. Because if you qualify, then you become immediately embedded. And then the switching costs protect you more. And the performance is like a mode. Do you say this in English? Mode?
Yeah.
Like a deterministic factor. Am I choose or not? And then, I mean, fashion is the adoption for environment and for serious material. It's a weak point. But robotics is not going there.
Sure. Also, what investors call the quality of your business remains so critical in fashion and textiles, where when you are in aeronautics, you might have contracts that run 15 or 20 years. If you're in the automotive industry, you have contracts that run 5 or 7 years. If you are in fashion, you have no contracts at all. They're just ordering your material, and next season they might order zero from you. So that's also, I think, part of this system where you said suppliers are designed to be replaced and the system is hostile. If you now reflect your last, 10 years in this development of these various materials, and you would give one, I would say, brutally honest piece of advice, which is also a little bit what we do at Brain sometimes with our clients, to enter the market for material founders, what would that be? What is it that deep integration in the supply chain, or what is it?
I will not make friends with if I say what I'm thinking now, but let's water it down very much. I would say if your material requires explanation to justify a kind of adoption, it will not scale because the explanation is friction. And performance is the only propulsion which you can ask for. You have to build a material that I would say collapses alternatives. And the system, if your material becomes a dependency and not a novelty, then it's maybe the way of doing it. And at the moment, I did not see a lot of material from my perspective. It's just my perspective, right? So me being not a material scientist, more like a very sophisticated innovation manager. There are not many materials who fulfill this performance as propulsion and explanation as friction narrative. And in our specific cases, building a fiber and selling it to whoever is not a business model. It will just fail. You have to engineer end to end. Probably this is maybe the main conclusion I learned and paid a lot of money to understand this.
Yeah, we were, let's say, in the last 10, 15 years, thinking a lot that if you have a more sustainable solution and you want to replace the incumbent, that the market would accept lower performance and for the sake of being more sustainable. And I think now in these changes latest since, would say, the election in the US, where we see this pressure on sustainability on all ends getting stronger and stronger, we thought now, you actually must at least perform as good as the incumbent that you are trying to replace, fulfilling all the other criteria that you were mentioning. But if I hear you, I would say, no, you actually need to be better, because the system inertia, the unwillingness to change. So I need to give a motivation to my brand partners or to my supply chain to actively change something that's working by either better performing or by giving a lower price. Is that something that you would sign?
Yeah. So how to say it is, and it's the main logical fallacy, because somehow, speaking now about fashion, they are set out to having their supply chain survive. And this is what you have to understand, because if you understand the real disruption is not a better fiber. You have to rewrite the complete operative system that, I would say, even decides which fiber gets to exist. And you can this if your fiber is the outperformer of an incumbent. And then it becomes very, very clear that fashion is not longer the endpoint, right? So it's just an application layer. And this is what I personally think, because it's not longer fashion always tied textile revolutions to identity, right? But if you switch this to the, I would say, intended use, performance, materials, etc., then you understand it's about the matter as itself, the physical embodiment of what you produce. And I think this is maybe the real truth in the whole fashion-related textile innovation sector, right? So this is what I think. And again, I'm not against fashion. You need fashion. You need textile. Humanity will always dress. We will not run around naked suddenly, because we don't see any end of this. But it is definitively a complete disruption. The field is ripe for disruption for people who build from end to end and not longer fall to the logical fallacy that it fits seamlessly in existing supply chain. It will not work, because the supply chains are optimized for commodity and underperforming fibers. I mean, a sheep fiber, I can tell you now one more hour about the hair follicle difference between sheep species and so on and so forth, and what adaptive manufacturing methods you need to employ to make halfway decent textiles. Right? So I understand this is not the point.
Henri, I think we will do that in a second episode, which we definitely will do one day. Thank you very much for this journey, which is kind of touching many areas of way beyond products and materials, into philosophy, into ethics, into future. And I think it was a hell of a ride for me, and hopefully will also be for our listeners. Yeah, thanks for joining and for sharing your thoughts, and looking forward to see you soon somewhere in real life.
Thank you, Thomas.
That brings us to the end of today's incredibly insightful and philosophical conversation with Henri Kunz from Geneus. We examined biomaterials through a systems lens, from the valley of death and performance thresholds to intended end use and industrial scalability, while also unpacking how luxury fashion's concentrated power over supply chains shapes which innovations survive. This conversation makes clear that the future of textiles will be defined by performance and completely new markets way beyond fashion. To share your insights and questions for this episode, head over to our Brained LinkedIn page and join the conversation. The link will be posted in the show notes too. Subscribe to the HeroInside podcast to be sure not to miss the next episode. Until then, keep exploring, learning, and being a hero in your journey towards a better world.
This has been an episode of HeroInside the Ingredient Branding Podcast with Tomas Vucurevic. Each episode features stories and wisdom from game-changing creators and the shapers of the world's most exciting and influential ingredient brand. To learn more about ingredient branding and Tomas's work, visit brained.co. That's BRAIND.co. Until next time.